How concerned are you that, let's do the economics and the globalization first. How concerned are you that there is this deep uncertainty now in the world of what happens next?
The global economic situation varies over time, varies depending on the policies of policymakers and depending on the elections decided by the voters in those countries that are governed by a democratic system. So change is something that we reckon with, that we have to anticipate, and that we have to plan for. So from the little we know, and I insist on the little we know, because this is really work in progress, and there have been a lot of announcements, a lot of tweets, a lot of things being said. But our job at the IMF is to really assess the reality of changes. But from the little we hear, we have reasons to be optimistic about economic growth in the United States, okay? It's likely that there will be a tax reform. It's likely that there will be additional investment in infrastructure. And as a result of that, it's very likely that growth will be up in the US. And we have revised our growth numbers for the United States, both in 2017 and in 2018. It was also predicated on pretty good numbers during the third and fourth quarter of 2016. So both from a looking backward perspective and looking forward based on little we know, it's very likely that the US economy will fare better. Now, that's the good news part. The more worrying news, if you will, is that it will have consequences on the rest of the world. And we are seeing it, and markets have anticipated it. And we have seen the dollar evaluate relative to other currencies, and we are likely to see more interest rate rise decided by the Fed as a result of that, because unemployment is at its lowest historical low, and inflation has begun to get close to the threshold which will trigger interest rate raise. So currency higher, interest rate higher, that's a tightening that is going to be difficult on the global economy and for which economies have to prepare.
So you have elegantly described a scenario that leads to volatility and that leads, to use your phrase that you've used before, spillover effects. And there is spillover.
I avoided spillover because you don't really know what spillover is.
But we're going to see them. These waves, these economic waves, are going to lap across the shores everywhere, aren't they?
Yes, they will. But don't forget that there will be, that you have to start with the positive. Better US economy is generally good. So that's a net positive. And then you have to factor in the net potential negatives, and it's going to be dependent on the situation of each and every country. A country that is heavily indebted in US-denominated bonds or loans is going to be affected.
Are you preparing for that?
Countries have to prepare for that, and together with the authorities of the Emirates under the great hospitality of Dubai, this morning we had a meeting of all the finance ministers and governors of central banks of the Arab countries, and clearly the message that I gave them is resilience. You have to really make sure that your economies are resilient, that they are solid from a public finance point of view, that you watch your fiscal situation, that you reduce your deficits if you have them, and that you diversify both the economies and the sources of income for the state.
Having been through 2008, one would have thought that this part of the world doesn't, has seen the enormous effects if they're on the wrong side of the curve. Do you think the message has got through?
Well, when I discuss with the local authorities, they are clearly mindful of what has happened in 2008. And they're clearly mindful that having been heavy in debt, having been heavily leveraged, has caused them great harm. And it was thanks to the solidarity of some of the countries here in this part of the world that they managed through. But I think the lessons have been learned.
The other problem, of course, is the other side. I mean, We don't want to dwell too long on this, but if you're talking about building walls on the southern border of the United States, and you're talking about a protectionist policy, for example, abandoning TPP, we can put Brexit in there as well, somewhere into that mix. The world is turning protectionist, Managing Director.
The world, and when you say the world, it's also generally public opinions around the world. It's more than the countries that you've mentioned. It's the fact that people are losing confidence, that they're focused on something that policy makers, we collectively, have not focused on enough, and that is those who have not had the benefit of international trade, those who have not embraced globalization and have been left to the side. And today, and more importantly tomorrow, those who will be left out as a result of technological breakthrough and the impact of a combination of intelligent artificial intelligence, robotization, and so on and so forth. And we need to prepare for that, and we need to be mindful of what we have not focused on. We've been saying globalization is great, international trade is great, and it is. If you look at the average income of people in advanced economies over the last 30 years, it has doubled. If you look at the emerging market economies over the same period of time, it has increased threefold. But we have not looked at those who were badly, negatively impacted, and that's what we need to do.
Okay. His Highness here has created an entire infrastructure around the concept of happiness in an economic sense, not in terms of, gosh, I'm feeling really good. But the two are quite related, as you're well aware. The happiness concept is very much part of the future of government. Related to that, most governments yet have to get to grips with the downside, advanced economies, of globalization. And some haven't even started.
That's correct. And
yet they're still espousing, as we heard at Davos, they are still espousing globalization is good. I'm tired of hearing speeches from people still espousing globalization is good.
Because it's hard to focus on this other side of the equation. Because it's hard to actually go down in the trenches and figure out how those people affected by globalization are going to be helped. Is it going to be a social safety net? Is it going to be massive training and vocational training on a lifelong cycle? Is it going to be more education of young people, not just for the traditional set of courses and classes, but for what will actually make sense in 10, 20, 30 years' time? Is it going to be flexi-security like in the Nordic countries? I have a whole list of examples of countries that are trying to do it, some of them with success. Others are exploring and are tittering, but not finding.
This is one of those wonderful questions that I have no responsibility for the answer, for dealing with these difficult issues, so I can just throw it out there.
That's the privilege of being a journalist, huh?
Thank you. I shall abuse it shamelessly.
I'll resist.
How did leaders get it so wrong? How did so many leaders fail to see the devastating effects in their advanced economies to the point where you've got a voter rebellion with Brexit in the United States, in Colombia with the FARC revolution, arguably, even the president accepts that, and I dare to say, in your own country, in France.
I would challenge your point about Colombia. I think Colombia is not it's a different story, and the fact
they
that there is...
They still wanted to give a bloody eye to the government.
Yeah, but peace at last has been negotiated and settled after 40 years of negotiation. So I wouldn't put that in the camp of the sad stories, quite to the contrary. But why haven't we all noticed? One is because it was insidious, because it came gradually over time, and there is probably an amplifying factor now as a result of technologies. When you look at jobs lost, when you look at certain regions, yes, some of it is attributable to international trade, but a lot of it is also attributable to robotization and to the substitution of manpower by machines. So it was insidious, it's been accelerated recently. I think a more important factor, which has led to the frustration of the many voters, has been this issue of the middle class mobility. You know, if you look at kids who were born in the 40s in the United States alone, 92% of them actually earned more money than their parents. If you look at those who were born in the 50s, it's not 92%, it's hardly 50%. So the thought that the next generation after yours is not going to be making as much money, might not be as well off as you were, and might be unhappier than you were, that's a factor that has aggravated. So you have the acceleration by virtue of technology, and you have the aggravation by virtue of lack of mobility, which is partly caused by excessive inequality in many societies.
So when His Highness here starts something like this event, which by its very nature is going to touch on some of the touchiest, most difficult issues, do you think, which is basically, we have no the economic happiness of people, the well-being, the safety, security, even the political and safety and security is under threat. It's going, you obviously, you can see what's happening here is raising a debate that others are not willing to have yet.
Well, I would say that it's a tribute to the innovative spirit of Dubai and the inspiration that is generated by His Highness. The fact that there is open, candid discussion on these topics, the fact that the well-being and happiness of people is right at the center of the debate, is willingness to discuss even the most difficult issues. And it's good.
On this question of protectionism, I mean, we started with it, but we can look at it, I mean, the failure of TPP, again, back to the globalization issue. How do you tell people that they can be better off in a freer or fairer trade environment?
Well, I know it's not fashionable at the moment, but I think that facts, figures, actual assessment of the reality matter, and that we have to be honest about it and not be
What does that mean, by being honest? Does that mean telling people that they won't have jobs for lives? Does that mean telling them that they won't do as well as their parents did?
No, I think it means that education is an absolute imperative, and not just for the first 15 years of your life, but for your entire life, as is being, for instance, implemented now in Singapore with the lifelong cycle of learning. I think it also means, really sort of pointing the finger on what the benefits have been, including outside your shores. So, of course, it's not fashionable to say that hundreds of millions of people in developing countries have been taken out of poverty, but it matters when suddenly those who are too poor to survive actually want to leave their shores and get on yours. So development and improvement of economics in the world matters to each and every one of us.
How frustrated are you at the inability of the Europeans to get the economic house in order? Just this, I mean, this isn't necessarily a Greece question, but just this week, again, we're reading about will the fund, won't the fund, and I'm not getting into that at the moment in terms of, but 8 years after this thing started, and we're still arguing about it. Is this not indicative of the failure of systems to deal with these big issues?
Well, you know, I would be the last one to say that the system is perfect, but I would also be, I would be the first one to remind each of us that those countries, including mine, were at each other's throat and killing each other for decades, and that the European Union back more than 50 years ago was actually intended to address that and to stop the killing and to stop the blood and to stop the wars, which it did, and hopefully will continue to do for the foreseeable future. But you know, I know you have in the back of your mind Greece, which is a continuous project, partnership, difficult one, that we have collectively with the European partners. But let's not forget that there was Ireland, there was Portugal, there was Cyprus, and that those three that are also part of that same euro area have been successful outcome from the crisis that we all suffered in 2008. So yes, it's not 100% fixed, but I would say that there have been significant improvements, including in the building of that euro area and that European Union. More to be done, no question about that.
Let's turn to this part of the world.
Yeah.
Many of the countries in this part of the world are going to learn what Benjamin Franklin said all those years ago, that there are only two certainties in life, death and taxes. I think they have learned, they have experienced one, they're about to experience the other. How do you tell a country that has and a populace that has been used to unlimited subsidies, or that has been used to government largesse, guess what? It's suddenly going to get rather nasty, and you're going to have to put your hand in your pocket and pay.
Well, I would say, first of all, most people in the world do, so, get used to it. Second, if, people, consumers, depositors, investors, entrepreneurs want to have a country that is organized, that has all the basic regalian authorities in place, whether you talk about police, whether you talk about justice, whether you talk about education, whether you talk about roads, and so on and so forth, you need public investment. To have public investment, you need public funding. Now, if those fundings are reduced because the price of the barrel has gone down by about 50% relative to the very, very high prices of 2014, that money needs to be found somewhere else. And as a result, there has to be a degree of taxation. And I really would like to pay tribute to most of the Gulf countries in particular, led by the UAE, for deliberately willing to put in place a VAT. I think the agreement was signed a week ago that it's going to be effective beginning on January the 1st, 2018, at a relatively low rate, and with a system that hopefully will be simple enough and digital enough, because you start from scratch and you can be innovative in that respect, so that it works.
You need to tell them as well, though, not to get addicted to the idea of raising taxes, don't you? Because, well, let's face it, your home country, my home country, once you've discovered that there's this nice little pot of money that will come in every time you just raise taxes a bit, it's true.
It's a question of balance. If you want.
Since when did government ever get balance right?
Well, that's one of the things that they have to do. Well, look at Dubai. Dubai has been balanced and is only tolerating a 0.6% deficit this year because it's investing massively for the 2020 Universal Exhibition. So there are governments that actually, are cautious with what they do with their funds and, are prepared to do a bit of deficit when it's a question of investing into the future. So if you have investment, if you have operations that are sensible and correspond to the people's will, then clearly you need the revenue to go with it. It's a very, anybody who's doing accounting knows that.
Finally, as we come to sort of you have probably one of the largest megaphones in the world.
Not as big as yours.
I think I'm stumped for an answer on that one. But they listen to you, they just tolerate me. And the other problem is they can always switch me off to the other side. Don't even think about it. As you now look forward in your term of office, there are going to be huge economic complexities as the US shifts, issues of equality change, income inequality, gender inequality, all these things shift. The tectonic plates are on the move, aren't they? How do we manage them, and what's your priority?
I would say priority number one for countries and for policymakers is be resilient, be solid in your public finance, have the buffers that will help you in case of shock. That's number one. I would say number two, because we've seen it in 2008, the financial linkages between countries, the environment into which finance fuels the economy or plays by itself, that is critically important. And I'm going to be very mindful of where international financial regulations go. I think it's clearly important that the banks, the financial institutions be solid and be not excessively leveraged and be not allowed to do anything they please, because they have a particular responsibility and they have a particular benefit as well. And number three, I think it's critically important that governments around the world be also mindful of excessive inequalities, because I think that's at the root of a lot of this confidence issue that we discussed earlier.
Is that an ever so, your second point on banks and financial regulation, is that an ever so diplomatic way of warning against rolling back Dodd-Frank too much?
I would not put it as a package, because Dodd-Frank is a whole series of many things. But when it comes to financial stability, to the ability to supervise, to the strength of those institutions with due accountability, I think it's critically important for the mission that the IMF has, which is financial stability around the world. So yes, we will be very mindful of that.
You'll be watching that very closely.
Yeah.
And on the question of inequality, we're talking at the full range here, aren't we?
You know, I may add something.
Yes, please.
Because of the digital evolutions that we see, because of the fintechs that are activating all over the place, and that's good. We need to be particularly mindful in that regard, because regulations, supervisions are watching the present based on the learnings of the past. It's the future that is going to be interesting, the future that is going to be full of opportunities and risks. And in the financial sector, I think we all policymakers have a special responsibility to
on that cybersecurity area, which I know the fund has looked at particularly as well, do you continue to be worried that we are so far behind, we are so not on top of this, that it is an accident waiting to happen?
I hope not, but when I speak to governors of central banks around the world, they all say that top on their mind and top on their list of worry is cybersecurity and cyber attack
The
risk.
Central Bank of Bangladesh managed to lose over 100 million. Correct. And the money didn't just come from anywhere, it came from the Fed.
Yeah, and the Fed was able to freeze some of those, but not all of them. So it only goes to show that it's a weak link here and a tolerance there that has actually facilitated that. So we need to be just extremely, extremely cautious. By the way, there was also human facilitation in that particular fraud. So it's not only an issue of machines, it's not only an issue of digital platforms, it's also an issue of people and ethics.
Finally, I'm not inviting you, unless you so feel the need, to comment on the elections in your own country, but I suspect not at the moment. But if we look at, there are elections in the Netherlands, there are elections in France, there's an election in Germany this year. I could point to other ones around the world as well. How worried are you and at the fund that any one of these events could become another litmus test in the way in which what happened in the US and Brexit has become?
You know, I'm worried, as we all are, about the outcome of some of these elections. But I'm becoming old enough to remember stories from the past. And I remember when Matteo Renzi was elected in Italy, everybody thought, oh my goodness, what is going to happen to Italy with this maverick? There was not much mavericking about. And he wasn't that person. When Mr. Tsipras was elected prime minister in Greece, you know, many commentators thought that it was going to be terrible. Well, it is difficult, it is laborious, but at least we are talking and we are trying to help with changes, and there are changes taking place. So I think we need to be
Mr. Trump?
cautious. I have not seen enough of the reality to actually compare the assumptions, the fear, the observers' comments, and the reality of it all. But we have to respect, the electors' decisions, and we have to, each of us, be guided by our mission. My mission is financial stability, economic prosperity, for the benefit of 189 members. So I can't just focus on one, here, there. I have to be alert and alerted to everything that is going on a global basis.
Do you suffer from jet lag? Because I have seen you get off the plane after an all-night flight from Moscow looking as fresh as ever. You came in from Washington yesterday morning. Do you suffer? And if so, what's the secret? Please, please tell me.
I tell you what I did yesterday morning, which was, to me, fantastic and rejuvenating. I went for a swim in the sea and swam for about half an hour, and I felt totally rejuvenated as a result of that. So I highly recommend the swimming as quickly as you can after getting off a plane.